Welcome back to part 2 of our 2-part episode on protecting your kidney health with Dr. Kevin Lowery. If you haven't had the chance to listen to part 1 yet, make sure to tune into that one first so you won't miss any of this invaluable information on how to best protect your kidney health. Let's jump in.
We'll have people who come in with, maybe just slightly abnormal, very early chronic kidney disease. And they say, oh, don't worry, since my primary doctor asked me to come over here, I've eliminated all potassium and all phosphorus, and they come in and their potassium's actually low now. And I say, that is for our advanced chronic kidney disease patients. I want to focus on, again, if say they're hypertensive or diabetic, let's focus on those sort of dietary modifications. I'll let you know if and when your potassium starts going up, or your phosphorus or your magnesium, or any of those things. And we'll address that in real time. Because at that very early stage, it's way more important to focus on the dietary changes that can alter what caused this in the first place, not the stuff that we're going to see in advanced chronic kidney disease.
Yeah. The kidneys are so remarkable because they receive such a high amount of blood flow. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's about 25% of your cardiac output is filtered through your kidneys.
Yes.
So that is a considerable amount of blood flow. And you can imagine if you have high blood pressure, the glomeruli, or these little the little units in your kidneys that are filters, they're constantly getting exposed to this really high blood pressure, and they're fragile, and they're going to start sclerosing and fibrosing and things like that. And that's going to lead to kidney disease.
Yeah, no, 25% is correct. And another way to think about it is you have about 5 liters of blood in your body on average, and you filter about 180 liters a day. So you're filtering your entire blood volume about 36 times a day.
Wow. Yeah, that's a tremendous amount. So awesome. What about supplements as far as kidney health?
There's not, anything in particular that, has been shown to necessarily aid. I mean, I know a lot of people think they'll come in and they'll say, oh, you've had high blood pressure that wasn't controlled for a long time, and your creatinine's now a little high. This is what we're going to focus on. And I want to, get your blood pressure. And they say, oh, well, I'm going to take cranberry. And cranberry, it has some, helps prevent bacteria from sticking to the bladder wall, things along those lines, potentially to help UTI management or prevention. But I think there's just this sort of word association, but it's not like drinking cranberry juice fixes chronic kidney disease. So there's not much there. If anything, almost the one thing that I will make a point of is that we do have some patients, especially as they have more advanced chronic kidney disease. And I know at some point I think we're going to discuss electrolytes and those sorts of things, but a lot of the supplements you can get over the counter, they're for people who have presumed normal kidney function. And so we sometimes do see issues with people taking various XYZ supplements, and we'll see their potassiums are getting high, or their calcium. A lot of people will take, extra calcium and vitamin D for various reasons. But if you do have abnormal kidney function, those are things you have to at least share at minimum with your team, but potentially maybe not even a great idea.
Yeah. Oh, that's good to know. So maybe we'll talk about those, because, the supplements that I think of are the ones that I mentioned previously in other podcasts that really everyone should consider taking. But you take it, and we always make the caveat to take it with the knowledge that your primary care doctor knows about it, because and as Kevin mentioned, like if you have CKD and you're taking high doses of vitamin D, it could lead to
you can get hypercalcemic very, very easily. You can get vitamin D toxic and hypercalcemia, potassium, even things like what would seem relatively harmless, but people, if they're constipated, a lot of the over-the-counter products have high phosphorus content or magnesium content, and they can actually cause problems. When you have chronic kidney disease, there are case reports of people using phosphorus laxatives and enemas, and that phosphorus builds up so quickly and deposits and causes acute kidney injury on top of their chronic kidney disease. And it's so those things definitely, if you have chronic kidney disease, we always tell everybody, please call us for any new medicine, even over the counter stuff.
the supplements that I always recommend: vitamin D, magnesium glycinate rather than oxalate, omega-3 fatty acids, a good multivitamin, curcumin. I mean, these are all good basic supplements, but if you have CKD, definitely speak with your nephrologist, because as you just mentioned, Kevin, vitamin D you should be maybe concerned about. Magnesium you should be concerned about.
This needs to be watched.
Yeah.
I mean, the good news is those are all very measurable things.
Right. Yeah. You just got to watch them. Yeah, absolutely. And then potassium, used to be many years ago that we would take more potassium than sodium. The sodium was less prevalent, but now things have switched down to 180, where we eat much more sodium now than potassium. But if you have chronic kidney disease, you can have consequences of eating too much potassium, and many people have to have it monitored. Yeah.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I said, and too much sodium. Yeah.
And sodium. Yeah.
That definitely can be an issue. Yeah. You have to really frequently watch both. But for the majority of our patients, we still focus on the less sodium. And then if potassium becomes an issue, we'll do that. And that's maybe one thing to mention here too, is again, because a lot of people, if they find out they have abnormal kidney function or the CKD, they'll get online and kind of start looking. And if you look up a kidney diet, people very frequently talk about, limiting potassium or limiting phosphorus, because those things are cleared by your kidneys. And in advanced chronic kidney disease, they can build up, and phosphorus can cause a whole slew of problems, but usually those are less dangerous. But obviously high potassium can lead to cardiac arrhythmias and can kill you. And so we'll have people who come in with, maybe just slightly abnormal, very early chronic kidney disease. And they say, oh, don't worry, since my primary doctor asked me to come over here, I've eliminated all potassium and all phosphorus, and they come in and their potassium's actually low now. And I say, that is for our advanced chronic kidney disease patients. I want to focus on, again, if say they're hypertensive or diabetic, let's focus on those sort of dietary modifications. I'll let you know if and when your potassium starts going up, or your phosphorus or your magnesium or any of those things. And we'll address that in real time. Because at that very early stage, it's way more important to focus on the dietary changes that can alter what caused this in the first place, not the stuff that we're going to see in advanced chronic kidney disease.
Yeah. That's a great point, because it is important to eat a high potassium diet. Potassium is found in a lot of greens and vegetables and things of that sort. So you want to eat those types of foods. So don't be scared to do that. If you're healthy, obviously you don't consider that at all.
Right.
It's really, as Kevin mentioned, it's really, kind of more of a late stage chronic kidney disease. And that's why you just have to see your primary care doc.
Right. And these are measurable things. We'll let you know when it's time to, hey, let's start curbing this or cut back a little on that.
Yes. Okay. Awesome. All right. So let's get to some other questions that people often think about when it comes to kidneys. What about thirst? Should you only drink when you're thirsty? How much should you hydrate?
Yeah. So the short answer for the most part is yes, drink to thirst. When, those sayings been around forever, the 8 ounce glasses of water sort of a thing that a lot of people discuss. The biggest part of that came from, I wrote it down because I couldn't remember the year, 1945, the U.S. Food and Nutrition Board came up with a recommendation based on sort of your metabolic needs. And they said about 2.5 liters a day. And if you convert liters to ounces, that's sort of where that 8 ounce glasses of water is coming from. But what kind of got missed in that, because that recommendation sort of made the press, was that they said majority of this, potentially up to 70, 80%, comes from foods we already eat. And there's certainly not an appreciation for that. Like to your point though, if you're eating a well-balanced, healthy diet that's lots of fruits and vegetables, think about cucumber, tomato, melons, these things are loaded with water, things that we don't totally appreciate. Even a baked potato is like 70% water. So, you're getting a fair amount of water, but people have, that aspect of it got lost. And so people think, okay, in addition to everything I'm eating and drinking, I need to take in my 2.5 liters of water. And that doesn't really, there's no data that that's going to be extra beneficial. And there's even actually some data that shows that that proves that it doesn't. They've taken patients who had chronic kidney disease and sort of randomized them into a high water intake. This was a study done in Canada, a high water intake. And these people ended up drinking a little over a liter more a day and having urine output of well over half a liter more than the other side of the arm per day. And it had no impact on their progression of chronic kidney disease. So this isn't something you sort of like drink your way out of. Listen to your body. With the one caveat there is we have very intact sense of thirst, right, as you sip your water. That does wane a little bit as we age. And so that is worth noting. And so in our elderly population, I will sometimes, especially if their family says, hey, I don't think they drink a lot, I will say, okay, sometimes you can cue them and say, hey, maybe just bring a glass of water close to them. And, maybe they'll take a sip then versus, having that innate sort of thirst mechanism that tells them to go get water. Or maybe it's not strong enough to make them want to get up and go get it because it's not as easy for them. But for everyone else, your sense of thirst is strong, and if you listen to your body, you'll do fine.
Yeah. And I'll just add to that, that the data is looking at endpoints, like you're looking at maybe an endpoint of worsening kidney disease or, some other measurable endpoint, but not necessarily subjective well-being. So I always tell people to hydrate, and a good way to check your hydration status is to look at your urine. In
Absolutely.
fact, if it's very dark, that you're not hydrated enough. You should be peeing clear urine. And that's kind of a way you can check it yourself. Just continue to drink, especially if you are, you're working out, you're building muscle, which, we're going to talk about in this podcast as well, but you really need to hydrate yourself. You need to kind of flush your muscles, kind of get rid of the lactic acid buildup. It's so important if you're exercising, just for your overall health, to just stay hydrated. So that's just, one thing I want to add.
Yeah, absolutely. No. And I tell people too, I say, if you're only drinking when you're thirsty, then that means you're actually always chasing it a little bit too. Like you're if you never ever feel thirsty, then maybe you could back down a little bit. If you're like, man, I pee 4 times a night because I drink so much, you're like, all right, well, if you never, maybe you could back down a little bit. But if you're always only drinking because you're thirsty, that's not that great either. There's some, kind of data out there potentially as well, and some specific diseases, things we talk about, like Mesoamerican nephropathy, where we think that chronic, long duration dehydration, people like, working in, manual labor, agricultural areas, potentially who have just long runs of being dehydrated, and then maybe they catch up at night, but for 6, 8, 10 hours a day, they're dehydrated. That likely is maybe causing some injury there. That's obviously like in a very extreme measure, but to that end is sort of where I say, if you're only drinking to thirst, that's not ideal either.
Right. And we see that in the hospital, we see hypovolemic kidney injury, not infrequently. Right. I mean, it's maybe along that spectrum.
Right. Totally. Yeah. It's like a minor level of that for a long period of time. And so you end up getting these, permanent injuries.
Yes. And something I recommend as well is waking up in the morning, putting some lemon in some water and mixing it with a little salt. You add these, electrolytes and the lemon to help absorb water a little bit better. If you drink straight water, it's typically fine, but you're not absorbing as well as if you mix some of that in. So there's a lot of, hoopla around this hydration multiplier that's out there. It's like in these packets. Right. You put them in water and everybody's like, oh yeah, this one glass means, equals 2. Right. And it's actually, in fact, just sugar and electrolytes, and it's really not good for you. So if you just do lemon, a little bit of salt, I mean, that's perfect. And it goes down well. Sometimes a lot of, people they drink straight water as well. It just feel like it absorbs quickly. But if you do something like I just mentioned, it goes down much easier.
That's good advice.
Yeah. Okay. So the next thing, alcohol consumption. People often drink and pee a lot, and they're like, "Oh man, it's just because I'm hydrating." I'm like, I'm peeing, but that's not true. Can you explain to us what happens there?
Yeah. Well, and And they also think that because when you drink, you pee, that alcohol is actually cleared by your kidneys, but it is clear, is cleared by your liver. And so your liver is doing all the work. We're taking all of the sort of responsibility for that, just as an aside. But yeah, so when you drink alcohol, what happens is the alcohol actually blocks a hormone called antidiuretic hormone, ADH. And what ADH is responsible for is holding on to water when your body needs water. It works in the very final parts of the filters in the kidneys, or the tubules of the kidneys, and it makes your body hold on to water. And so if that is blocked, what you do is you end up just losing a lot of water. So while, beer is 90% water, if you're not having any ADH around or having any ADH that can have an impact because it's being blocked, it's all coming right out of you. And we all know that by, if you have a lot the next day, you're quite dehydrated and you're like, oh, I don't get it. I had, this many ounces of beer.
Drink 10 beers. That should be fine.
Water. How come I'm so dehydrated I can barely talk? And it's because all that water just went straight through because the ADH gets blocked.
Yes. Yeah. So that's the mechanism of that. So if you do drink, you're going out, just make sure you don't go to bed drunk, for one. It's like,
right.
That's number one. But two, try to hydrate as much as you can.
I always thought, one for one, ideally, understanding that the ADH is still going to be blocked. So even the water you're drinking in real time, you're probably going to pee a lot of that out too. But so then whenever you're sort of done for the night, really focus then on, making sure you stay hydrated also. And then, all that extra urine output too. You just by the sheer flow of urine, the volume that's coming out, you tend to pee out some potassium. That's why people kind of have cramping the next day, maybe. Magnesium, you can pee out. Alcohol actually has a direct impact on the tubules. It makes you pee out magnesium. And that can actually last for weeks. So it's not just the volume and the water that you're not holding on to, but some of your electrolytes can get impacted too.
Eat healthy, obviously, because that has those, you've got those minerals in there, but also magnesium supplementation, as I mentioned earlier, is always a good idea. I think it's about maybe 60 to 70% of people are magnesium deficient in general. So it runs rampant. So it's always good to just supplement yourself with magnesium. Okay, let's talk about a couple more questions. Water toxicity.
Yeah.
Is it a real thing? What is water toxicity all about?
By and large, no, is the short answer there. If you have normal kidney function, it shouldn't be much of an impact. You'll notice it on a day. If right now after this podcast, you go and you drink 2 liters of water quickly, in about an hour and a half, you're going to probably go pee a lot and it's going to be very clear. It can be an issue for some patients, in particular if you have abnormal kidney function, because when you have chronic kidney disease, you don't manage salt and water like you should. You aren't going to have the appropriate responses to antidiuretic hormone or other hormones that our body uses to manage salt and water. And so you can actually get too much water. And the way it manifests is that your sodium, which is sort of, the main electrolyte in our blood that sort of helps maintain our concentration, our osmolality, will get just lower, and we can see that. Similarly, if somebody has abnormal liver function or abnormal heart function, other things where they're essentially going to be volume sensitive, you certainly could have too much. Patients who take in a massive amount of water in a very, very short period of time acutely could lower their sodiums. That's something we typically call psychogenic polydipsia, because it's typically only in the setting of some underlying psychological disorder, because your body's not going to want you to take in that volume of water that quickly. And so it really has to be some sort of underlying process that's driving you that way. The other time you can see it is just an overall malnutrition. If your sort of water or volume intake relative to your solute intake, so the solid things I'm eating, is off, then that'll cause sort of low sodiums and that imbalance, sort of what we like to call a tea and toast diet or beer potomania. If you're just not getting any nutrition, but you're taking in large volumes of fluid, But even then, that's more of just a sodium thing. It's not necessarily water toxicity.
Okay. Yeah. And I do remember actually a couple of things come to mind. One is, in the hospital, I'd see this not infrequently as somebody with, as you mentioned, psychogenic polydipsia or taking in too much free water, or we call it tea and toast diet. Basically, you need a certain amount of osms to process all that water. You can't just drink free water and process it without taking some kind of solute.
Yeah, our kidneys have a limited concentrating and diluting ability. They're really, really good at it. But at the end of the day, they can only concentrate or dilute your urine so much. And that range becomes less and less as you have abnormal kidney function. That's why it's easier to have too much. But yeah, I mean, and your kidneys are very good at diluting your urine, but you can overcome it, especially if you're not giving it any sort of osmolar load to help balance. Like if your nutrition's just really not where it needs to be.
Yeah. Yeah. So it is out there. There was a contest called No Pee for We. I don't know if you remember this, Kevin, but do you remember this contest? Where there's a Wii, when we were growing up, it's the Nintendo Wiis that everybody would play with.
Yes.
Actually, maybe that was even beyond our youth. But there was like a radio contest where people would drink as much water as they can and not pee.
Right.
Whoever could hold it the longest would get the Wii.
Right. Yeah.
And then one person ended up having a seizure, because of water toxicity. So, which means it was the sodium dropped so much with the free water intake. So that's something, like if you do something crazy like that, yes, you can get toxic. But if you just follow your, what you feel naturally, you're usually okay. Now, I guess maybe the other caveat would be when people are running or, going for a really strenuous hike, they're sweating a lot. They're just taking free water. And
absolutely.
That could be a problem.
Yeah. And that again, it's a ratio thing again too, though. So you've tasted sweat, right? It's salty. And so what tends to happen there is it's again, not necessarily that they just happen to take in too much water, because almost all those people are still kind of, they've lost so much, but they're replacing salt and water with just water. And so, fortunately, recently, at these running places now, they'll either have gel packs or, some sort of supplement that, like you mentioned, a lot of them are sugar based, but even in that scenario, just have something with it to kind of match that osmolar load. But if it's just water, it's the same idea as if you're having, profound diarrhea. It seems like it's just water coming out, but there's actually, sodium and other things there too. And you've got to replace it with some osmolar. But in a race, it's in such an acute time frame that, what's happening is, they're losing salt and water. You got to replace it with salt and water.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you're in those situations, mixing electrolytes, there's some nice hydration packs too that you can buy. You just mix the electrolytes in the water, drink that. That's fine. You don't have to go with the Gatorade or, all the Powerade or these sugary drinks. It's the sugar in there. I mean, as you said, sugar is it's fine if you need it, but if you're trying to avoid that sugar intake, which you should, then that's the way to go.
Right. Absolutely.
And then last question is creatine. So many people, there's a lot of good data supporting creatine for muscle growth and muscle building. Many people take it. Does creatine have an effect on your creatinine or your, the measure of your kidney function?
Right. So our muscles are always turning over. And that's why creatinine has historically been a pretty good marker for kidney function, because it's made by your body at a fairly steady state. And it only leaves your body through the kidneys. So that's how we came to use that for a kidney function test. Creatine is the waste product of your muscle turnover. Creatinine is the waste product of your muscles turning over. Creatine is the precursor to that. And so that's why you can build muscle when you're taking creatine. So the direct impact is that if you take creatine and build more muscle over time, your creatinine almost certainly will rise. Not necessarily just because you're taking creatine, but because you've actually built more muscle. Again, going back to the, a creatinine of 1.6 in LeBron versus Judge Judy sort of idea, where more muscle means a higher creatinine. The potential risk or downside, or where people get concerned, is when you take creatine, as I'm sure it says on the bottles and as everyone's read, you got to stay hydrated, because whatever creatine doesn't get converted into new muscle is going to get filtered and get excreted, and we can't just pee out extra waste products are solute, it has to go with a volume. And so you're going to lose that extra water. It's the same reason undiagnosed diabetics or poorly controlled diabetics pee so much, is because all that sugar, your kidneys can only reabsorb so much and the rest spills over into your urine. Well, you can't pee out sugar. It has to come in liquid. And so it takes all that water with it. And so that's the same thing there with creatine. So, usually when I see someone, if their creatinine has gone up and they're taking creatine and they say, I'm really good about staying hydrated, I say, okay, if it's not dehydration, then, we can test to see how concentrated your urine is, how well hydrated you are, or hold it for a little bit. Let's kind of see what happens. Because if you stop it and you're still drinking a lot of water and it doesn't move, then yeah, maybe this is just a muscle mass and you've put on a lot of muscle, sort of a thing. But the big key there is stay hydrated, stay hydrated, stay hydrated.
Yes. Excellent. Awesome, Kevin. This was great. Before I let you go, there were some case studies we were talking about earlier where there are indeed patients that really focus on preventative, or they have CKD, they're focusing on lifestyle changes to improve, and they do in fact improve to a certain degree. So yeah, it is possible to do this. This is not just
a big part of the recommendations from a dietary standpoint for CKD is to cut back on protein intake to some degree. And in particular, your animal proteins, in particular red meat. And the idea there is, in some, mouse studies, they know that a very high protein diet can cause some hyperfiltration of these glomeruli and some increase in glomerular pressures, and has an association with, therefore, abnormal kidney disease. The funniest thing about it, or not funniest, but is that, we have a very high protein diet relative to sort of guidelines anyway. If you have abnormal kidney function, chronic kidney disease, they call for about 0.6 milligrams per kilogram of your ideal body weight per day in protein intake. And so that's sort of been the guideline there. And what they've looked at in some other studies where they took patients who were diabetic, or some studies non-diabetics, and they had abnormal kidney function, a GFR, or about 70%. So about 70% kidney function of what it should be, and some protein in your urine. And they put these people on, a low-fat diet, or the Mediterranean diet, or, and one study, even a low-carbohydrate diet. And they said, okay, let's just see what happens there. And interestingly, the patients in the low-carbohydrate diet had about a 20% increase in their protein intake. And so they thought, is this going to have a negative impact? But what they found was, across the board, all three of those groups actually did very well. They all had a reduction in their creatinine. They all had a decrease in the protein in their urine. And what they found when they looked back at the data to tease out what was going on is that they found that everyone in those groups who lost weight had a better blood pressure and decreased insulin resistance were the ones that kind of skewed the data to the group's favor. And so while, the recommendation remains to cut back on some of your animal protein intake, the bigger take home point from that was just find a healthier diet that you can stick to and that works for you. Your blood pressure comes down, your insulin resistance comes down. That's what has the big impact, whether it's Mediterranean, low fat, whatever. Just get something that works for you that you can stick with, and improves all of those sort of metabolic abnormalities that were causing the problem in the first place.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Protein intake is important at baseline. Like, the ideal plate would be 3/4 vegetables and then a handful of protein in that plate. So oftentimes people don't get enough protein. Now, if you're talking about chronic kidney disease, or people leaking protein from their urine, which happens with chronic kidney disease, then you have to think about, maybe curtail some of that intake. Or if you're taking too much, talk to your doctor about how much you should eat.
In the U.S., the average is about 1.2 grams per kilogram.
Is the average intake?
Intake, yeah. So I mean, it's the meat and potatoes, and a lot more, like you said, a fish size. You talk to everyone that talk about like a chicken breast the size of your palm. That's not what they serve at some of the restaurants around here. Like bigger head.
Right.
So
yeah, a bit more. Even still with that, if it depends what your goals are as well. So we can have a whole discussion about protein, but it really depends what your goals are, because if your goals are or for longevity, it's really decreased protein is shown, and Walter Longo he's one of the premier researchers in longevity science, and he's shown that less protein is better for longevity. If you're looking at, the other extreme where you're trying to really focus on muscle building,
absolutely,
then you want to take a higher protein intake.
Yes.
So that, up to 1 kilogram per pound, which will equate to 1 gram per pound, equate to maybe about 2 grams per kilogram.
Yeah.
Or even more.
You're matching that with the exercise and muscle growth,
Yes.
Purposefully.
Yes.
And so,
yeah,
it's like a growing child. You're like, all of a sudden your kid's eating twice as much as they used to, and you're like, oh, but it's because the next thing you know, you have to buy them all new clothes. So if you're purposefully matching that, I don't think that's going to be an issue at all.
Right.
For sure. Because it has to be in that whole spectrum of, I got a big goal here, like you were saying. What's your goal?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's important to think about those things. A lot of nuances here, but yes, great discussion, Kevin. I appreciate all this. How can people get in touch with you or even see you in practice?
Our group, as you mentioned, is Virginia Nephrology Group. 703 Kidneys rolls over to our office.
Look at the same number.
Yep. That's the easiest way to track us all down. And we're in Northern Virginia. We're the biggest group around here. So,
and we'll link your practice in the show notes as well.
Awesome.
Great. Well, thanks, Kevin. I really appreciate having you on.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed this podcast. And if you did, please make sure to hit the subscribe and the like button and leave a comment about what you'd like to see on our future episodes. Just a reminder that this podcast is for educational purposes only. It does not substitute for professional care, nor does it constitute medical or other professional advice or services. If you're looking for medical care, please seek a qualified doctor or medical professional. For more information, or if you'd like to check out our programs, please visit our website, peakwellnesshealth.com. That's peakwellnesshealth.com.